Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're opening a file on one of history's oldest and, honestly, most baffling cold cases. Picture this. You are the founding father of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. You've conquered lands, you've built cities, you're literally a living god on Earth, and your legacy spans millennia. But fast forward a few thousand years, and historians are scratching their heads, digging through the sands and asking one fundamental question: did you even exist? This is the story of Menes, the legendary first pharaoh of Egypt. We're going to treat this like a true crime detective story today because, quite frankly, tracking down the historical Menes requires peeling back thousands of years of myth, misdirection, and missing evidence.
So let's start with our victim, or rather our monumental founder. The name Menes was first documented by an Egyptian historian and priest named Manetho during the relatively late Ptolemaic period. Manetho wrote that Menes led the army across the frontier and won great glory. And the classical tradition goes on to credit this single man with an absolutely staggering achievement, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt into one single kingdom and becoming the ultimate founder of the first dynasty out of the gate. To ancient Egyptians of later eras, Menes was their George Washington. He was their Romulus. He was the definitive, undeniable starting point of their entire recorded history.
But when exactly did this glorious unification happen? Well, if you asked 19th century scholars, you were guaranteed to get a hilariously confused answer. You had Jean-François Champollion, a brilliant mind, placing Menes way back in 5867 BC. Then, Carl Richard Lepsius insisted, no, it's 3892 BC. And John Gardner Wilkinson, he argued for 2320 BC. They were casually off by thousands of years. It's a real testament to how incredibly murky the origins of Egypt truly were. It wasn't until modern archaeology finally caught up and radiometric dating techniques improved that a consensus was reached, placing the era of Menes and the start of the first dynasty somewhere between 3200 and 3000 BC.
Which brings us to the ultimate historical twist of this explainer. We finally know roughly when he supposedly ruled, right? We know the monumental achievements he's credited with, but when we look at the dirt, the stones, the pottery, and the artifacts from that exact time period, he just isn't there. Menes is almost completely absent from the early archaeological record. Contemporary evidence of his reign is virtually non-existent. Think about that for a second. How does the man who single-handedly forged a unified Egypt manage to leave his own name off the earliest contemporary records?
Okay, let's dive into this. If Menes doesn't show up in the artifacts under the name Menes, well, he must have been operating under an alias. Let's look at our prime suspects. Mainstream Egyptology has basically narrowed it down to two primary candidates for his true identity. In one corner, we have Narmer, a powerful ruler who actually does have a really firm claim to unifying Upper and Lower Egypt in the archaeological record. In the other corner, we have his successor, the first dynasty pharaoh, Hor-Aha. Most scholars today suspect that Menes is simply another name for one of these two guys.
Now, what's really interesting about this piece of evidence is the mismatch it reveals. Take a look at the cartouche of Menes as it appears on the Abydos king list. You can clearly see the hieroglyphs spelling out his name. But here's the catch. The Abydos king list is from the 19th dynasty. That is many, many centuries after the first dynasty. You see, early kings were known by their Horus name. Think of it as their daily active title used during their lifetime, and the one you'd see on contemporary monuments. But these later king lists recorded their Nesubit name, which was a more formal, official title used in historical records. This exact mismatch between the active names recorded on early monuments and the formal historical names recorded on later lists is why reconciling the identity of Menes is such a massive puzzle.
To try and solve this, linguists took a really hard look at the Egyptian form of his name, MNJ, which was probably pronounced something like Menej. It literally translates to "he who endures." So some scholars, like I.E.S. Edwards, suggest that this isn't even a birth name at all. Instead, it might just be a descriptive epithet, a title coined for a semi-legendary hero whose actual name had simply been lost to time. It's kind of like a modern monument dedicated to the founder. It might actually conceal a collective identity, acting as a convenient historical shorthand that wraps up the achievements of several early rulers, like Ka, Scorpion II, and Narmer, into one neat mythic package that was just much easier for later generations to digest.
But for those who believe Menes was absolutely a single, real person, they point right to this next piece of evidence. Look closely at this reconstruction of a seal impression found at Abydos. Notice those symbols? It shows the royal crest, or serek, of Narmer alternating with a very specific sign, a game board symbol. That game board symbol is read as MN, which is widely interpreted as an abbreviation of Menes. Now, at first glance, this looks like the absolute smoking gun, proving Narmer is Menes. But hold on a second. Other scholars argue that in early seal impressions, these secondary symbols often name a prince. So they argue this actually proves Menes was a prince of Narmer, making Menes his successor, Hor-Aha. So yeah, even with the evidence right in front of us, the debate over who this name truly belonged to continues to rage on.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the myth of the man grew far, far larger than any archaeological footprint. Whether he was Narmer, Hor-Aha, or some amalgamation of multiple kings, his cultural legacy was absolutely massive. Ancient writers credit him not just with unifying Egypt, but founding its great capital of Memphis, supposedly by diverting the entire course of the Nile River to do it. Diodorus Siculus tells us he introduced the worship of the gods, the practice of sacrifice, and a luxurious style of living. Fun fact on that last one, later pharaohs actually hated that part. A 24th dynasty pharaoh even went as far as inscribing a pillar cursing Menes for introducing luxury. Oh, and my absolute favorite piece of the legend? Menes supposedly founded the city of Crocodilopolis in gratitude after he was magically saved from his own hunting dogs by fleeing across a lake on the back of a crocodile. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
So how does the story end for a crocodile-riding, river-diverting, nation-building god-king? Well, according to Manetho, after a glorious reign of 60 to 62 years, Menes met a shockingly abrupt and bizarre end. He was killed by a hippopotamus. Yes, you heard that right. The monumental founder of ancient Egypt was taken out by a hippo. It's a completely deadpan, almost comical conclusion to a life steeped in such supreme grandeur and unchecked mythos.
Which really leaves us right back where we started, looking at a cold case that refuses to be neatly closed. On one hand, we have classical histories proclaiming his supreme glory, and on the other hand, we have dirt and stone from his own era that stubbornly refuse to speak his name. So I leave you with this final thought to ponder about how we actually construct our own histories. Was Menes truly a single visionary king who united a nation and just suffered a terribly unlucky encounter with a hippo? Was he a composite character, a historical shortcut invented to explain the complex, multi-generational process of Egypt's unification? Or is he purely a myth, a phantom founder who lives up to the very meaning of his name, a myth that simply and stubbornly endures?